Did you know that Wanda didn't even get her powers through the Mind Stone? And let's not even get into how different Taskmaster is. The MCU's greatest heroes have layers to them you couldn't have imagined in the comics, and it's time to see just how much of the source material Marvel Studios left out and modified. Captain America. When Marvel Studios set out to adapt Captain America, they faced a massive creative risk. It was 2011. Audiences were obsessed with gritty, brooding, morally ambiguous heroes like Christian Bale's Batman. And here was a character draped in an American flag whose defining personality trait is being a literal Boy Scout. He was also just made for an entirely different time, and a lot of those 1940s trends didn't hold up anymore. While it would have been safer to reinvent him for the modern audience, they instead went with a one-to-one adaptation of Steve Rogers. In the comics, Steve Rogers isn't chosen for the super soldier program because he's the toughest guy in the room. He is chosen because he is a frail, asthmatic kid from Brooklyn who knows the value of strength and compassion. When Dr. Erskine asks him if he wants to kill Nazis, Steve's response shows exactly what kind of guy he is.
I don't want to kill anyone. I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
The MCU ripped this dynamic straight from the 1940s source material. From the physical transformation via the serum to wielding the vibranium shield, fighting the Red Skull, and tragically getting frozen in the ice to wake up as a man out of time, the cinematic origin story is a flawless mirror of the comics. But the actual magic of Steve Rogers is in his unwavering morality. When the government, his friends, or the entire world tells him he is wrong and his gut says he is right, you can't convince him otherwise. They also really nailed his battle genius. In the comics, Steve is renowned for using that shield in ways no one else can. In Tales of Suspense, Tony actually gives the shield and Cap's gloves magnetism so that he can control them mid-flight and have it return. But he removes all of it because he's just way better at throwing it manually. That's how good he actually is. He calculates the exact trajectory of the shield, how it will ricochet, and how it'll come back to him mid-throw. This is something that the movies do almost too well, to the point that it feels like it's right out of the comics. But more than that, in both the movies and the comics, Steve's humanity is something that shines through constantly. Iron Man. In 1963's Tales of Suspense number 39, billionaire weapons manufacturer Tony Stark is injured by a booby trap laid by a local terrorist organization. Shrapnel is lodged near his heart, and he is captured by a warlord who forces him to build a weapon of mass destruction. Instead, Stark secretly works with a fellow captive scientist named Ho Yinsen to build a magnetic chest plate to keep himself alive, followed by a crude, bulky suit of iron armor to escape. If that sounds identical to the first act of the 2008 film, it's because it is. Marvel Studios lifted the entire narrative structure, the supporting characters, and even the visual design of the original gray Mark I armor straight from the 1960s pages. They modernized the location from Vietnam to Afghanistan, but the core arc was the same. But what makes Iron Man the most fascinating entry in the virtually identical category is that the movie ended up changing the comic book, not the other way around. For decades, the comic book version of Tony Stark was a relatively stiff, serious, and often thoroughly unlikable futurist. He was a B-list hero defined mostly by his struggles with alcoholism and corporate espionage. But when Robert Downey Jr. infused the character with hyper-charismatic, fast-talking, neurotic energy, he created a cinematic icon. The MCU version was so universally beloved that Marvel Comics actually experienced a reverse translation. Writers began altering the comic book Tony Stark to sound, act, and quip exactly like Robert Downey Jr. Notice how he even has the RDJ goatee and hair? Beyond the personality shift, the MCU also perfectly captured the sheer scale of his intellect. When examining the smartest characters across the cinematic universe, Tony's on-screen inventions, from discovering a new element in his basement to being the first guy to crack time travel, perfectly mirror the level of intelligence he's been shown to have in the comics. Although he definitely didn't invent time travel in the comics, that one was Dr. Doom. Speaking of things he didn't invent, did you know Ultron was Hank Pym's invention and not Tony and Bruce's? Yup, the trauma of making one of the Avengers' greatest foes was actually a massive part of his character arc. Age of Ultron is full of stuff like this. Tony didn't even make Vision in the comics. That one was all Ultron. He wanted to build a synthoid to infiltrate the Avengers and destroy them from the inside. And to do that, he stole the body of the original Human Torch and programmed his mind using the stolen brainwaves of the deceased Avenger, Wonder Man. Wow, the more you know. Doctor Strange. First introduced in 1963's Strange Tales number 110, Stephen Strange is an insufferably arrogant, highly successful neurosurgeon whose career is destroyed when a car crash shatters the nerves in his hands. After exhausting his immense fortune on experimental surgeries, a desperate Strange travels to the Himalayas seeking a rumored healer known as the Ancient One. Instead of a physical cure, he has to learn the ultimate secret to life. He's actually not that important. I'm mostly kidding. Half and half. Overcoming his extreme ego was a massive part of his character in both the MCU and the comics. And if you're thinking, how does Strange have an ego? I just need you to understand that after the Ancient One showed him, well, everything, that was only the first step towards humbling this man. Most people find nirvana after an acid trip. Stephen Strange saw the inner workings of the universe and partially started to entertain the idea that he, in fact, does not know everything. Actually, the 2016 film doesn't really change much. Benedict's portrayal aside, the surgical hubris, the devastating crash, the desperate trek to Camartage, all of it is pretty much comic accurate. Stephen's also deeply defined by the fact that he's a doctor.
When I became a doctor, I swore an oath to do no harm, and I have just killed a man. I'm not doing that again. I became a doctor to save lives, not take them.
He took an oath to save lives, which constantly clashes with being a superhero, since sometimes there really isn't a choice, a concept that Daredevil struggles with to this day. That was a defining part of his character in the stories like Doctor Strange, The Oath, and they carried that over pretty well in the movies too. I know you're all wondering about his spells, and yes, those are pretty accurate. The mirror dimension, for one, is actually exactly like the comics. In Ditko's panels, he always went for a kaleidoscope look, and they really recreated that perfectly. Plus, remember those red magical ropes he used on Thanos? Those are the crimson bands of Sidorak. But here's the funniest part. Remember how in the MCU it's,
I love you in every universe.
yeah, in the comics, Strange and Christine have virtually no relationship. The woman this man caused an incursion for is pretty much a stranger to him in most storylines. Black Panther. Adapting Black Panther wasn't just about getting a superhero suit right. It was about adapting an entire fictional Afrofuturist nation and the heavy political burden of its king. And to be honest, the MCU kinda crushed it here. T'Challa in both the comics and the movies has the same presence, a monarch burdened by the weight of his nation, constantly walking the line between a hero and a king. While T'Challa was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in 1966, the MCU drew its heaviest inspiration from Christopher Priest's legendary 1998 Black Panther comic run. Priest redefined T'Challa not just as a guy in a catsuit who punches bad guys, but as a brilliant, unreadable monarch who was always 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. And that's the exact vibe Chadwick Boseman embodied. He is a man of intense duty who protects the most advanced nation on Earth. But it's not a completely clean adaptation. There are a few heavy differences, and the biggest is that T'Challa is actually a lot smarter in the comics. In the MCU, it can sometimes feel like he's just Captain America with a crown. But in the comics, he has super genius intellect. He's canonically one of the 8 smartest people on the planet, has a physics degree from Oxford, and even made a new scientific field called shadow physics. In the MCU, the tech genius is Shuri, not T'Challa. She's the one who's in charge of all the high-tech stuff in Wakanda. Thanos. The only exposure a lot of fans have to Thanos is the twisted survivor of Titan who had a pretty gnarly plan for the universe. His quest to collect the Infinity Stones and wipe out half of all life is driven by a sick sense of mercy. He genuinely believes he is the only one with the will to save the universe from consuming itself. Basically, he is convinced he's the main character. Well, close enough. He's at least the main villain. The movie version of Thanos is a guy you can at least reason with, try to understand on some level. In the comics, his entire existence revolves around his obsessive one-sided love for Mistress Death. That is not some supervillain. That's the cosmic embodiment of death, who usually appears as a skeleton woman in a robe. In the legendary 1991 Infinity Gauntlet comic run, which the movie's heavily adapted, Thanos doesn't snap his fingers to balance the universe. He does it to impress his goth crush. Mistress Death brings Thanos back from the dead and tasks him with killing half the universe because she feels that there are more people alive than have ever died, throwing off the cosmic balance. Thanos collects the gems, builds the gauntlet, and wipes out half of all existence purely as a grand romantic gesture. He essentially uses the Infinity Gauntlet as a multi-billion-dollar bouquet of flowers. But the juiciest, most embarrassing part of Thanos' comic lore is how far his jealousy goes. At one point in the comics, Mistress Death actually starts showing romantic interest in another Marvel character, Deadpool, because Deadpool is constantly dying and visiting her realm. Thanos gets so incredibly jealous of this that he actually uses his cosmic magic to curse Deadpool with absolute immortality. Here's Wade just regenerating from his own decaying bones. Thanos literally makes Deadpool unkillable, just so Deadpool can never cross over into the afterlife and steal his girl. Scarlet Witch. If you want to see what happens when corporate lawyers accidentally dictate superhero lore, look no further than Wanda Maximoff. When Joss Whedon introduced Wanda and her twin brother Pietro in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron, Marvel Studios did not legally own the film rights to the word mutant or the X-Men franchise. Those belonged to 20th Century Fox. Because of this massive legal hurdle, the MCU had to completely erase Wanda's comic book roots. In the movies, she was introduced as a Sokovian orphan whose parents were killed by a Stark Industries bomb, and her powers were unlocked through Hydra experiments using the Mind Stone. It is a completely different script in the comics. Wanda and Pietro were introduced as mutants and founding members of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, led by Magneto himself. For decades, the defining pillar of Wanda's comic book lore was that Magneto was her dad. Her struggles with her family, mutant discrimination, and her dad's constant streak of terrorism shaped her character. But the MCU completely swapped this out. Instead of Magneto, her dad is some Sokovian guy called Oleg who died watching a sitcom. Her powers are mostly the same though, although her reality warping can affect the entire universe in the comics, not just a small town. Besides that, her relationship with Pietro is similar too, but the comics themselves are a tangled mess of retcons and rewrites. Wanda isn't even Magneto's kid anymore in the comics, nor is she a mutant, but that's a whole topic for another video. We'll be here for 2 hours otherwise. Taskmaster. Besides Thanos, this one is probably the biggest difference. When Marvel adopted Taskmaster for the Black Widow movie, they pretty much threw out the character's entire background and character. You see, in the comics, Taskmaster is a man named Tony Masters, born in Brooklyn. Tony injected himself with a steroid that unlocked photographic reflexes. And what is that? Basically, it lets him copy any physical movements, fighting styles, and weapon skills that he sees. And that's about all he has in common with Antonia Dreykov, the MCU's take on Taskmaster. She's the daughter of the villainous General Dreykov. She had a cybernetic chip implanted in her, which turned her into a silent, mind-controlled slave who mimics fighting styles via a computer interface in her brain. The mimicry is similar enough, I guess. Show Antonia some footage of a couple of heroes, and she'll move just as well as Tony, but the personality? Oh man, it's actually brutal what they did to her. Tony was a whole guy. He set up Taskmaster's Academy, a literal school for street-level goons, the kind Wilson Fisk would employ. He's loud, snarky, extremely sarcastic, and for some reason, he's almost always fighting Deadpool. He has also fought almost every hero under the sun. To him, going up against Cap and Spidey in the same week is a very casual Monday. But here's the most crucial part. Tony's powers take up so much of his brain's capacity that he constantly forgets his own life and personal experience. He forgets his own past constantly, and he has even forgotten his own wife. That's a whole layer to the character that doesn't exist anymore. I guess it's not needed since you probably don't have much of a life to forget when you're a remote-controlled slave like Antonia. It's crazy to think just how different some of these guys are. It's like the MCU has 2 modes, either a one-to-one perfect adaptation or practically making their own character. And it's not just the guys we've talked about here. There are dozens of other heroes and villains who are radically different.